Find a comfortable position and let your shoulders soften. Tonight we will journey through the life of a man whose story stretches from one end of a galaxy to another. Before he became a wise hermit or a flickering spirit, he was a curious child with a mop of auburn hair, who tugged at his mentor's robes and asked too many questions. Born on a world few could point to on a star map, he was taken from his family while still an infant and brought to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. In the temple's stone halls, he learned to quiet his mind and feel the Force like a breeze against his skin. Masters taught him to deflect blaster bolts with a training saber, to meditate for hours without moving, and to trust in the living energy that binds all things. Yet for all his discipline, there was a spark of mischief and determination that set him apart. When the time came for him to be chosen by a master, many passed him over, sensing a stubborn streak. Only Qui-Gon Jinn, a maverick who listened to the currents of the Force over the decrees of the Council, saw the potential in the young apprentice and offered him his guidance. With Qui-Gon, the young Padawan traveled to far-flung systems, settling disputes and uncovering schemes. They navigated bustling marketplaces and silent glaciers, their boots leaving prints in sand and snow. On Mandalore, they spent many months protecting a duchess named Satine Kryze from assassins. During that time, Obi-Wan and Satine shared whispered conversations over teacups and under starlit skies. The warmth between them could have blossomed into love, but duty and vows stood between them. They chose their respective callings, and Obi-Wan carried the memory of Satine's laugh like a candle in his heart. The missions continued. He learned diplomacy and patience, and he came to respect Qui-Gon's habit of listening to intuition even when it conflicted with orders. His master taught him that compassion sometimes meant bending rules, and that the Force's will could not always be codified. Together they forged a bond that felt like family. That bond was tested on Naboo. The Trade Federation blockaded the peaceful planet, prompting the Jedi Council to send Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to negotiate. Talks quickly dissolved into escape and pursuit. The two Jedi rescued a queen in disguise, outran battle droids down marble corridors, and fled in a silver starship with a damaged hyperdrive. On a backwater world of twin suns, they met a boy named Anakin Skywalker, whose kindness and skills stunned them. Qui-Gon wagered on a thrilling pod race that left spectators breathless and freed the boy from slavery. Back on Coruscant, the Council rejected Qui-Gon's request to train the boy. They sensed fear and danger in him. Still, the Master remained steadfast. Returning to Naboo, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan confronted a Sith warrior named Darth Maul, whose dual-bladed saber crackled through palace halls. During the duel, Maul struck down Qui-Gon. Grief and resolve ignited within the Padawan. With a burst of energy, he leapt, parried and cut Maul in two. Cradling his dying master, Obi-Wan promised to train Anakin. The promise defined the next decades of his life. Elevated to the rank of knight, Obi-Wan took Anakin as his apprentice. Their relationship was complex from the start. Anakin saw in Obi-Wan a brother and sometimes a father. Obi-Wan saw in Anakin unparalleled potential and dangerous attachments. Together, they chased bounty hunters across skylanes, explored the rainy world of Kamino, and stood shoulder to shoulder in the arena of Geonosis as countless droids surrounded them. Obi-Wan's calm contrasted with Anakin's fiery impatience. When Anakin secretly married Senator Padme Amidala, Obi-Wan sensed a disturbance he could not name. He counseled his student against fear and possession, drawing on lessons from Qui-Gon. As clones marched into battle and lightsabers clashed against separatist blades, Obi-Wan balanced duty with compassion. He sat cross-legged beside injured troopers, listened to their stories, and treated them as individuals despite the masks they wore. The Clone Wars consumed years. Obi-Wan became a general in the Grand Army, leading the 212th Attack Battalion into sieges and skirmishes across the Outer Rim. On dusty plains and jungle worlds, he parleyed with governors, engaged droid commanders, and watched brothers fall. He reunited with Satine when Mandalore became a battleground, only to lose her to Maul's blade. Her final confession of love shattered something within him and steeled his resolve. On Utapau, he rode a four-legged Varactyl down vertical walls and slew the cyborg General Grievous with a blaster at close range. Moments later, Palpatine issued an order that turned clones against Jedi. Commander Cody, a trooper he trusted, tried to kill him. Obi-Wan tumbled into a lake and barely escaped. Returning to Coruscant, he discovered that Anakin had led an attack on the temple and slaughtered younglings. Horror and disbelief flooded him. Yoda tasked him with stopping Anakin. Obi-Wan swallowed his grief and set off for Mustafar. Mustafar, a world of fire and ash, was where brothers became enemies. In the glow of rivers of lava, Obi-Wan and Anakin shouted accusations and pleas that echoed their intertwined histories. Red and blue sabers flashed as molten rock splashed. Obi-Wan begged Anakin to see what he had become. Anakin accused his master of betraying him. The duel traversed narrow catwalks and floating platforms. When they reached a slope of black sand above the lava stream, Obi-Wan gained the advantageous ground. He pleaded with Anakin to stand down. Anakin leapt, and Obi-Wan's blade severed his limbs. He stood trembling as flames consumed the fallen figure. Tears stung his eyes. He could not deliver the final blow. Instead, he turned away, gathered Anakin's saber, and left him to what fate and the Force would decide. The screams and roar of the lava haunted him long after. Exile followed, bearing the weight of failure and loss. Obi-Wan delivered the newborn twins to their adoptive families, Leia to Alderaan's royal court, and Luke to the moisture farm of Owen and Beru Lars on Tatooine. He retreated into the desert under the name Ben. In a small stone hut, he built a life of watchfulness and waiting. He bartered with Jawas for mechanical parts, mediated disputes among settlers, and learned to speak the tongue of Tusken raiders to avoid bloodshed. He practiced lightsaber forms alone under the twin suns, and communed with the Force as Qui-Gon, now a luminous guide, taught him the secrets of retaining consciousness after death. He kept Luke safe from afar, intervening when dangers lurked too close. He aged, his beard turned white and his posture bent, but his eyes retained their clarity. News of the Empire's tightening grip reached even the remote settlements. He waited for the day when the Force would call him to act again. That day came when a young farm boy and a pair of droids stumbled into his life. Luke Skywalker carried within him the same curiosity and kindness Obi-Wan had once seen in another. Ben invited Luke into his home, told him stories of the Jedi Knights and a man named Anakin, who was once a friend, and gave him a lightsaber that hummed when ignited. Together with smuggler Han Solo, co-pilot Chewbacca, and Princess Leia, they infiltrated a battle station the size of a small moon. Obi-Wan disabled its tractor beam and then met Darth Vader in a corridor filled with troopers. They bowed slightly to each other before their blades crossed. Obi-Wan felt his purpose complete. He knew that if he continued to fight, Luke might be captured. He raised his saber in a gesture of surrender and let Vader's blade strike him. His body vanished, leaving empty robes and a stunned audience. He became one with the Force, and his voice whispered to Luke to run. Even in death, he continued to guide. As a luminous being, Obi-Wan appeared to Luke on Hoth's icy plains, on Dagobah's swampy paths, and on Endor's forest moon. He urged Luke to seek Yoda, to trust in the Force, and to confront Vader. He withheld the full truth about Luke's parentage until the boy was ready, and then offered counsel when the revelation shattered him. He watched with pride as Luke refused to strike his father down in anger, and instead offered him compassion. He witnessed Anakin's return to the light and the destruction of the Emperor. He smiled as fireworks lit the night sky above Ewok villages, and as spirits of other Jedi appeared beside him. Even after the Empire's fall, legends of the wise old hermit persisted. Across cantinas and campfires, people told stories of Ben Kenobi's kindness and courage. Children on distant worlds closed their eyes and imagined meeting a hooded man who would hand them a blade made of light and teach them about hope. The legacy of Obi-Wan Kenobi endured, carried on the breath of the Force and the hearts of those he touched. At the Jedi Temple, life for a youngling was a blend of routine and wonder. Obi-Wan slept in a dormitory with dozens of other children, their breaths in sync like a chorus of whispers. They rose before dawn when gentle chimes echoed through the halls. Under the supervision of caretaker droids and elder Padawans, they washed, dressed, and filed into classrooms where masters waited. Lessons covered everything from basic meditation to history of the Republic. Yoda would arrive sometimes, leaning on his gimmer stick and speaking in riddles that made them giggle and think. He taught them to reach out with their feelings and sense each other without seeing. In a wide training room, younglings practiced with tiny sabers set to low intensity, the blades buzzing as they parried remote droids that shot harmless stingers. They stumbled, laughed, and encouraged one another. At midday, they ate meals of nutrient-rich stews in long communal halls, sharing stories about their home worlds. Obi-Wan rarely spoke of Stew-Jon. He had no memories to share. Instead, he listened and created a family from the voices around him. Even with schedules, there were pockets of freedom. In those moments, Obi-Wan would sneak into the library and lose himself among shelves of holobooks. He loved exploring star maps, tracing routes between planets with his finger and imagining adventures there. He watched holograms of ancient duels, marveling at the elegance of saber forms. One afternoon, he and a handful of friends climbed the temple's high towers. From that perch, the city stretched in every direction, a sea of durasteel and transparisteel glinting in the sun. Speeders weaved through sky lanes like luminous fish. The sight took his breath away. The Force felt tangible up there, a gentle pressure on his skin. He promised himself he would walk those streets one day, as a guardian, not just a student. Discipline was enforced with compassion. When younglings misbehaved, masters would sit with them and talk rather than punish. Obi-Wan once hid another student's training saber as a prank. Instead of reprimand, Master Terra Sinube explained the importance of trust and asked him to help search. The embarrassment he felt taught him far more than anger would have. Over time, his mischievous impulses softened into a keen sense of humor that would later help diffuse tense situations. He learned that rules existed to protect, not to stifle, and that questioning with respect could lead to deeper understanding. Those lessons cultivated patience and empathy he would rely on when training his own student. Nights at the temple were serene. After supper, younglings gathered in circles to hear elders tell tales of Jedi heroes who faced temptation and triumphed through humility. Obi-Wan listened wide-eyed to stories of knights who turned battles by choosing diplomacy over violence. He whispered the tales to himself as he drifted to sleep, hands folded under his head. The hum of Coruscant outside was a lullaby. In his dreams, he stood on distant worlds, lightsaber in hand, defending the innocent. The temple forged his identity, embedding within him a sense of belonging and a duty to serve others. It also planted questions about destiny and choice that would linger when he faced crossroads decades later. Whenever doubt crept in, he would visit the Room of 1,000 Fountains. Water cascaded from tiered pools and plants from countless worlds flourished. He would sit cross-legged on a stone bench, close his eyes and listen to the sound of water. He imagined each drop as a life in the galaxy, each ripple as an action that influenced others. The Force flowed through everything, and this room made it easier to feel. He sensed tranquility even when his mind shook. This sanctuary taught him that inner peace can be found amid chaos, a lesson he would later teach Anakin and Luke. The temple was not just a school, it was a garden where seeds of wisdom took root and grew into a mighty oak that sheltered many. In quiet moments of exile, Obi-Wan often revisited the day when blue helmets turned red. He remembered standing on a rain-soaked platform, receiving a transmission from a commander he trusted, only to have that trust shattered by blaster fire aimed at his back. He thought about Cody, about the earnest trooper who had fought beside him on worlds named after flowers and storms. He remembered the way Cody handed him his saber, with a smile, before Order 66 turned that smile into a mask of duty. It hurt more than any wound. As he trudged through a ravine to escape the salvo, he felt the weight of thousands of fallen comrades. He saw flashes of Plo Koon's starfighter exploding over Katoni Modia, of Stas Ali's speeder careening in smoke. He smelled the burning halls of the temple and heard the sound of young voices pleading. On Tatooine, he had time to sift through those memories, turning them over like stones. He realized that the soldiers' betrayal was not born of malice, but of hidden commands woven into their DNA. He thought about the genetic code that had been manipulated, and about the men who never had a choice. Compassion washed away anger. He began to practice forgiving them in his heart, sending gratitude through the Force to those who had fallen. He buried his own lightsaber in the dunes for a time, unwilling to raise it against anyone. Instead, he built shelters, fixed moisture vaporators, and helped births of bantha calves. Every life he saved was a tribute to the lives he could not. Some nights he would sit outside his hut, gaze up at the unpolluted sky, and speak aloud the names of clones he remembered. Lai, Apo, Bree, Rex. He imagined their laughter echoing among the stars. He wondered if any remained free, if any had resisted the command. He sent a plea into the Force that they find peace. In this exercise he found his own peace. By naming his grief and releasing blame, he transformed a night of horror into a lesson in understanding. The desert taught him that healing comes slowly, like the way wind smooths a jagged stone over centuries. This practice of remembrance would later allow him to counsel Luke with empathy when the young man struggled to accept the dark acts of his father. Training a moisture farmer's son was nothing like leading legions of clone troopers. It involved patience, humor, and the art of storytelling. When Luke first held the blue blade, it wobbled dangerously. Obi-Wan chuckled and placed his hands over Luke's to correct his stance. They practiced in the empty canyons, where only lizards watched. He taught Luke to feel the Force by balancing on one foot and sensing the wind. He levitated pebbles and then gradually larger stones. He told tales of ancient Jedi to make lessons memorable. Luke soaked up knowledge like a thirsty sponge, but also asked questions that made Obi-Wan pause. Why must one let go of attachments? Why had the Jedi fallen? In answering, the old master had to confront his own failures. He admitted that fear and arrogance had blinded the Order. He confessed that he had misjudged Anakin. He framed these confessions as cautionary tales rather than burdens. Luke listened, eyes wide, absorbing both caution and hope. There were moments of lightness. Luke would complain about the heat or the sand, and Obi-Wan would laugh and recount missions on swamp worlds where leeches clung to boots. They bonded over fixing droids and comparing power converters. Each day he saw glimpses of Anakin's stubbornness and Padme's compassion in the boy. It startled and warmed him. When the time came to reveal Luke's parentage, Obi-Wan hesitated. He sat by the hearth, feeling the rough texture of his robe, and remembered every promise he had made: to protect the twins, to watch over Luke, to keep dangerous truths until the right moment. He took a breath and chose his words carefully. He told Luke that his father had been a great Jedi, that he had been betrayed and murdered by Vader. He omitted names and details, shielding Luke from an overwhelming weight. He justified this omission as protecting the boy's fragile sense of identity. He knew the truth would emerge, and when it did, Luke might feel anger at having been misled. He accepted this future anger as part of the burden of guardianship. Love can look like silence. When Luke eventually confronted him, after learning the truth from Vader himself, Obi-Wan felt a familiar sting. He stood in the glow of a swamp lamp on Dagobah and saw disappointment in Luke's eyes. He explained that from a certain point of view, he had told the truth. Anakin Skywalker had been consumed by Darth Vader. He also apologized without using the word sorry. He spoke of choices, of how identity can change. He told Luke that there is always a way back to the light. In that moment, he let go of his role as teacher and became a fellow traveler. He acknowledged that even teachers are fallible. The conversation lightened Luke's anger and strengthened their bond. It reaffirmed that honesty, even delayed, can heal wounds. Later, when Luke offered compassion to Vader on the Death Star, it was with the understanding that redemption is possible even after terrible deeds. Meditation in exile often carried Obi-Wan beyond the confines of his hut. In deep trance, he glimpsed shimmering threads connecting stars. He saw the Force not as a river, but as an ocean, with currents swirling in multiple dimensions. On one vision, he stood on a cliffside above a sea of luminous mist. Voices whispered from within, some familiar, some ancient. He recognized Yoda's chuckle, Qui-Gon's steady cadence, and even childhood friends long gone. They spoke not in words, but in impressions, warmth, caution, encouragement. He saw pathways through the mist, some leading to places he remembered, others to possibilities that never came to be. Every choice created a new ripple. The vision helped him understand that while the future is always in motion, the underlying network binds all outcomes. He felt small and significant at once. He carried this humility back to waking life, mindful that his actions could reverberate in ways unseen. During another meditation, he encountered a vision of Anakin, not as Vader, but as the hopeful 9-year-old on Tatooine. The child smiled and asked if he had done well. Obi-Wan answered truthfully. He had been brave and kind. The child then faded into an image of Vader on a throne, silent and immobile. Around him flickered possible futures. One where Vader remained forever in darkness, one where he turned, and one where he never existed. Obi-Wan understood that potential is not fixed. He sent love to each version. The vision shifted again to Luke, as an old man telling stories to children by a fire. Obi-Wan realized that his narrative, was one thread in a tapestry that continued long after his mortal form. He vowed to nurture hope within himself and others, even when darkness loomed. These visions kept his spirit buoyant through years of solitude. He also dreamt of Satine. In dreams, she walked with him through lush meadows, her hand brushing against his. They talked about politics and poetry. Sometimes she said nothing and simply sat beside him, watching the sunset. He would wake with tears and a smile. These dreams reminded him that love transcends physical separation. They softened the sharp edges of regret. He embraced the understanding that while one cannot return to the past, one can honor it by living with compassion. He would carry these dream moments into his interactions with strangers, offering empathy and kindness without expecting anything in return. Throughout the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan found himself serving not only as Anakin's master, but also as a mentor to Anakin's Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka arrived with energy and curiosity, a teenager eager to prove herself. When Anakin bristled at responsibility, Obi-Wan offered perspective. He took Ahsoka aside after missions and praised her insights, encouraging her to speak up during briefings. He allowed her to make mistakes and guided her gently towards solutions. He stood beside her when the council considered expelling her over false accusations and voted to believe in her innocence. He knew from experience how institutions could err. His support left a lasting imprint. Years later, Ahsoka would recall his fairness and warmth when facing her own students. As a general, Obi-Wan led with calm authority. He rode a Varectal into battle, not to appear fearless but to be closer to his troops. He knew the names of clone captains and listened to their suggestions. In the heat of battle, he cracked jokes to ease tension. On the field, he acted decisively, but once the blasters fell silent, he removed his armor and joined his soldiers for meals. He asked them about their dreams and fears. He recognized that leadership is a two-way channel, built on trust and vulnerability. This approach inspired loyalty that even Order 66 could not fully erase. Some clones would later remove their chips and remember him fondly. There were also times when leadership meant stepping back. When Anakin's anger boiled over on the Citadel mission, Obi-Wan allowed his former Padawan to take the lead. Watching from the rear lines, he saw how Anakin's boldness saved lives and nearly cost others. He later spoke privately with Anakin, acknowledging his strength and highlighting the fine line between courage and recklessness. He told him about Qui-Gon's own rebellious streak and how it had taught him to question without discarding wisdom. Anakin listened, head bowed. The conversation deepened their understanding of each other. Leadership for Obi-Wan was less about command and more about mentoring hearts and minds, a philosophy he would impart to Luke and others long after the guns went quiet. During his years in hiding, Obi-Wan adopted many personas. He grew his beard longer and wrapped his head in cloth to shield his features from sand and prying eyes. He wore faded cloaks and carried tools instead of a saber. To Jawas he was a regular customer, known for haggling over power droids. To moisture farmers he was a tinkerer who repaired evaporators for a modest fee. To Tusken raiders he was a desert wanderer who honored their rituals and offered water to elders. He traveled in a beat-up speeder that coughed to life and sputtered along dunes. He avoided Mos Eisley's cantina, not from fear but because he preferred the open sky to smoky rooms. When he did enter town, he kept to the edges, listening to gossip about Imperial patrols and faraway revolts. He passed tips to rebel sympathizers through coded phrases at the market. Along these journeys, he performed small acts of kindness that rarely reached record books. He healed a child's sandburns with herbs. He fixed a moisture pump for a widow without charge. He quietly diverted a stormtrooper squad away from a family of refugees by stirring a bantha herd into their path. He dug a shallow well in the waste so nomads could find water during dry seasons. He left credits under rocks near settlements where he heard hunger was pressing. Each act reminded him that heroism is not always grand. In doing these things, he found purpose beyond waiting. He felt connected to a living community, even while standing apart from it. One memorable night, he encountered a group of young bounty hunters in the dunes. They had been misled to believe that capturing an old hermit would earn them favor with the local governor. Obi-Wan assessed their nervous postures and uncalloused hands and knew they were desperate rather than malicious. He invited them to his fire, served them soup, and asked about their dreams. They told him about debts and sick parents. He offered advice on finding work off-world and gave them the name of a contact who could help. They left with full bellies and hope. The next day, one of the young hunters returned quietly with a pouch of tea as thanks. Obi-Wan smiled, realizing that compassion can transform would-be enemies into allies. This simple encounter affirmed his belief that connection, not conflict, is the heart of the Force. Failure shadowed Obi-Wan as faithfully as his robe. He failed to foresee Qui-Gon's death, failed to prevent Anakin's fall, and failed to stop the collapse of his order. Yet in each failure, he found seeds of wisdom. Rather than wallow, he dissected what went wrong. He remembered Qui-Gon's open-mindedness and practiced it with Ahsoka and Luke. He remembered his own strictness with Anakin and softened when teaching others. He looked at his role in the war and recognized how long conflicts erode ideals. He resolved to speak up when he sensed moral compromise creeping in. These lessons made him a better mentor even in solitude. When he told Luke to trust his feelings, it was because he had learned to trust his own only after years of self-doubt. He kept a journal in exile, scribbling reflections in Aurebesh on scraps of flimsy. He wrote about his dreams, about the taste of Tatooine's air, about his hopes for Luke. He wrote letters to Qui-Gon, confessing fears and asking for guidance. Sometimes he burned the pages and scattered the ashes, releasing them to the wind. Other times, he stored them under stones, leaving his thoughts to be found by no one. The act of writing helped him process emotions he could not share aloud. It also sharpened his storytelling, something he later used to lull Luke to sleep or to teach villagers about the Force. When Luke faced setbacks, whether failing to lift a rock or losing to a training remote, Obi-Wan gently reminded him that mastery is not linear. He shared his own missteps and the patience required to overcome them. He framed failure as a teacher, one who sometimes taught more effectively than success. He encouraged Luke to rest when tired, to cry when sad, and to celebrate small victories. Resilience, he said, is not about never falling, but about rising each time with more grace. By normalizing imperfection, he empowered the next generation to persist through galactic upheavals with hope intact. Tatooine was a crossroads for all manner of wanderers. Over the years, Obi-Wan met smugglers, escaped slaves, moisture farmers displaced by sandstorms, and aliens seeking refuge. One day, he shared a fire with a Devaronian who once served as a medic in the Clone Wars. The horned man removed his gloves to reveal burn scars and recounted how he deserted after Order 66. He had refused to kill wounded Jedi and instead smuggled them to safety. Obi-Wan listened with gratitude and sorrow. He realized that courage takes many forms, including walking away from violence. He told the Devaronian about Satine's pacifism and how strength can manifest as restraint. They exchanged stories until dawn and then went their separate ways, carrying each other's experiences forward. Another time, he encountered a human woman with hair like copper wire who was searching for a mythic artifact she believed would save her tribe. She had tracked rumors across star systems and arrived at a dead end. Obi-Wan did not know of her artifact, but he guided her toward a wise healer in Mos Espa who could help her tribe in other ways. She cried out of frustration and relief. He recognized the same mix of determination and desperation he had seen in himself when chasing Maul across the galaxy. He offered her water and a story about letting go of one quest to discover another. She left with a new purpose. He remained by the fire, reflecting on how guidance often means redirecting rather than solving. Near the end of his exile, he crossed paths with a traveling musician from Corellia. The young man carried a battered instrument and a satchel of songs. In exchange for a meal, he played melodies that reminded Obi-Wan of the temple's echoing halls and of Satine's laughter. The music stirred memories and released tears he had not shed in years. The musician asked about the song of the galaxy. Obi-Wan spoke of the Force as a harmony that can be felt by anyone willing to listen. They played and talked until the twin suns rose. When the musician departed, he left behind a string, broken during a passionate refrain. Obi-Wan tied it around his wrist as a reminder that beauty persists even amid desolation. These encounters broadened his perspective and taught him that exile does not mean isolation unless one chooses it. Stories are bridges across time and space. During his later years, Obi-Wan would sit around small fires with settlers and share tales of heroes and monsters. He told of Jedi of old who healed planets with their presence, of Sith who carved empires with fear, of smugglers who turned rebels. He wove lessons into these tales, like teaching children about the importance of cooperation through the story of four beasts who pulled a cart in different directions until they learned to walk together. He recounted myths from Stewjon about spirits who guard harvests, and from Mandalore about warriors who respect their weapons as extensions of their souls. Each story carried seeds of wisdom disguised as entertainment. He noticed how faces relaxed and eyes grew heavy as the rhythm of his voice lulled listeners towards sleep. Over time, his own life blended into legend. A group of youths once asked if he truly rode a crate dragon bareback while wielding twin sabers. He chuckled and told them about the Voractal Boga, clarifying that myth exaggerates truth to make values memorable. He encouraged them to create their own legends through acts of kindness. On another occasion, a trader insisted he had heard of a cloaked wizard who appeared out of nowhere to rescue lost travelers, leaving behind only the scent of rain on sand. Obi-Wan smiled. recognizing the description, but choosing to remain silent. He understood that stories live beyond their subjects and take on a life of their own. Sometimes he wrote down his stories in secret, not for glory, but to preserve the feeling of evenings around a fire. He imagined that centuries later, someone might find his words and feel less alone in the universe. He hoped that whoever read them would see not a legend, but a person who stumbled, loved, learned, and kept moving. He closed each entry with a note to his future reader: "May you find your own way, and may the Force be with you." Though Obi-Wan spent his final years on Tatooine, echoes of his influence traveled far. On Mandalore, clans told their children about the Jedi who had defended their Duchess and later defeated the tyrant Maul. Veterans of the Siege of Mandalore remembered his measured voice over comm channels and his willingness to listen to non-Jedi commanders. Some Mandalorians adopted his belief in purpose beyond tradition. A young foundling years later would name his blaster after Kenobi, hoping to channel patience and precision. Through whispers, his ethos infused a warrior culture with a touch of restraint. In the burgeoning rebellion, commanders like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa recounted his calm under pressure as they planned raids. They used his example to encourage cooperation among diverse cells. A hologram of him disabling the Death Star's tractor beam became a symbol of what one person can do. In classrooms on Chandrila, teachers told students about the old hermit who was once a general and who saved a princess and an entire world. They emphasized his sacrifice and his ability to step aside to allow others to rise. These stories shaped the moral compass of the New Republic. Even beyond the known galaxy, his name carried weight. Explorers in uncharted regions encountered civilizations that had heard faint rumors of a man who could move objects with his mind and who preached balance. They revered him as a sage, while myths can distort reality. The essence of Obi-Wan's teachings, compassion, humility, and perseverance, remained intact. His legacy, like the ripples in the room of 1,000 fountains, spread outward indefinitely. He became part of a constellation of stories that light the path for wanderers in dark times. The Force carried his influence to corners he never physically visited. This understanding comforted him as he watched over Luke, knowing that what we do echoes far beyond our immediate circle. As you drift toward sleep, picture the twin suns of Tatooine sinking below dunes painted in hues of rose and gold. A gentle breeze carries the scent of dry sage and distant rain. In a small hut, a wise old man sits cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing slowly. He inhales the warmth of the day and exhales his worries into the infinite. He hears the whisper of the Force, a song too vast for any one heart but present in each heartbeat. He knows that his story is both immense and minuscule, a thread in a tapestry that spans galaxies, and yet a thread that adds color no one else can. He smiles, feeling the lives of his friends and students like stars in a night sky. Imagine the Force as a lullaby sung by ancient beings. It hums in the rustle of leaves, the creak of floorboards, the cadence of your own pulse. It carries memories and possibilities. Obi-Wan hums along, a low melody that vibrates in his chest. He is neither grasping for control nor clinging to the past. He is present. He is grateful for the chance to have walked the paths he did. He forgives himself and others. He trusts that when he fades, new voices will join the song. He sends a final blessing into the Force for you, for those you love, and for those you will never meet. He hopes you find peace in the knowledge that you are held by a field of energy that is both cosmic and intimate. Sleep now, carried by the waves of a galaxy-wide lullaby. May your dreams be illuminated by starlight and guided by the wisdom of Jedi who came before. May the Force be with you, always. Long before the Order fell, Obi-Wan carried another heavy burden from a war that most beings never heard about. On the rain-drenched world of Jabiim, he led forces during a campaign that turned into a quagmire. Torrents of mud swallowed walkers and boots alike. Lightning flashed almost constantly, turning nights into a flickering gray twilight. The local resistance fighters were outnumbered and under-equipped, yet fought with ferocity born of desperation. The clone troopers slogged through trenches, their armor caked in rust-red soil that would never fully wash out. Obi-Wan tried to negotiate a ceasefire, but mistrust ran deep. Each step forward came at the cost of lives. During a critical moment, a wall of mud collapsed and crushed several platoons. Obi-Wan leapt into the torrent, using the Force to hold back debris while troopers dragged comrades free. He strained until his vision blurred and his limbs trembled. When he collapsed on the bank, he realized that some tragedies could not be averted even with power and will. Jabim haunted his dreams in exile. He heard the roar of rain and the cries of troopers calling him general. He remembered the hollow look in the eyes of survivors when they boarded transports, leaving behind graves that would dissolve under the next monsoon. He wondered what happened to the Jabimites after the Republic withdrew, and whether the Empire brought more peace or more oppression. In reflecting on this forgotten war, he grappled with the limitations of heroism. He understood that sometimes the best choice among bad options still leaves scars. He wrote about Jabim in his journal, not to dwell on pain, but to honor those who fell unseen. He hoped that by preserving their memory, he could give them a measure of immortality. Jabim was not the only place where he felt powerless. On Argonaut, a mission went wrong when the enemy used enslaved animals as shields. On Felucia, poisonous spores permeated the air, sickening clones despite filters. Each of these battles taught him humility and reinforced his belief that war is a failure of diplomacy. Later, on Tatooine, when he overheard settlers debating whether to retaliate against Tusken raids, he drew on his wartime experiences. He suggested negotiation, gifts of water and respect for territory. His counsel prevented bloodshed. By learning from past wars, he forged peace in small corners. The weight of Jabim became a source of compassion rather than bitterness. It reminded him that even those on opposite sides of a battlefield share similar fears and hopes. In sharing these memories with Luke, he taught the young man to consider the human cost behind every saber swing. After surrendering his body on the Death Star, Obi-Wan discovered that the veil between life and death was not a wall, but a curtain of light. He found himself in a space without distance where beings of the Force lingered. Qui-Gon greeted him with a warm smile and an embrace. They spoke without words about what had transpired since Naboo, about failures, about redemption, about love. Yoda joined them, his eyes twinkling with the humor and wisdom that had guided the Order. They discussed ways to guide Luke without imposing destiny upon him. They agreed to whisper rather than shout, to nudge rather than push. The three of them observed the galaxy like watching ripples on a pond. They felt each tremor in the Force when a child discovered their sensitivity, when a tyrant made a cruel decree, when a mother sang a lullaby. They vowed to offer guidance where it could be heard, and to respect free will where it could not. One day, another presence arrived, a man cloaked in black, who gradually shed his armor, like layers of guilt. Anakin approached hesitantly. Obi-Wan felt a surge of emotions: anger, relief, sorrow, joy. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Obi-Wan stepped forward and embraced his former apprentice. They spoke of the choices that had led them here, of fear exploited, of compassion offered. Anakin wept, and Obi-Wan held him until the sobs subsided. They forgave each other. They vowed to help Luke rebuild. In that luminous plain, wounds that seemed irreparable began to mend. Beyond this initial reunion, Obi-Wan explored what it meant to exist as consciousness. He could manifest in dreams, in flickering images, in the feeling of a hand on a shoulder. He watched children train in the new Jedi Temple, invisible but present. He sat in on discussions among elders about how to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. He whispered to Leia when she doubted her leadership, reminding her of her mother's courage. He guided Rey, a scavenger who would carry on the legacy, with a gentle "these are your steps" when she stood before the Force Cave. He witnessed the galaxy's cycles continue, peace rising, conflict stirring, hope enduring. In this communion, he realized that while individual lives end, relationships persist as long as someone remembers them. He also understood that his identity was not fixed to one body or one era. It flowed. He felt his essence merge with the Force, and yet remain distinct enough to love. This paradox no longer troubled him. He took comfort in the idea that existence is not a straight line, but a spiral. He was not gone. He had simply changed states. In this state, he could continue to tell stories and sing lullabies to those who needed them, ensuring that the wisdom of the past continued to touch the dreams of the future. There is poetry in the way a lightsaber is constructed. Obi-Wan remembered holding his first kyber crystal as a youngling. It pulsed within a light, resonating with his heartbeat. He spent days in the caves of Ilum, feeling the cold air sting his cheeks as he searched for the shard that called to him. When he found it, he knelt in the crystalline chamber and meditated. The crystal's song blended with the hum of the Force. Back at the temple, he assembled his hilt under the watchful gaze of craftsmen. He aligned components with precision, mindful that any misstep could cause a surge. When he activated it, the blade sprang forth, a clear blue like the morning sky. It felt like an extension of his arm and of his will. It symbolized responsibility and possibility. Years later, he guided Luke through a similar process. They did not have the temple's resources, but they had ingenuity. Obi-Wan scavenged parts from broken moisture vaporators and old droids. He instructed Luke on how to center his mind, to listen for the whisper of a crystal in the desert. Luke found his kyber in a rocky canyon, nestled inside a geode, like a secret. Together they cleaned and polished it. Obi-Wan explained that the color of the blade reflects the heart of the wielder: green for growth and harmony, blue for bravery and protection, purple for balance, and red for those who bleed their crystals through pain. He told stories of masters whose blades shone silver or gold. Luke asked what color his would be. Obi-Wan smiled and said it would reveal itself when lit. As they built the hilt, Obi-Wan spoke about life being similar to crafting a weapon. You gather experiences like components, childhood memories, friendships, losses, victories. You align them carefully, making sure to honor each piece. You add discipline as a power cell and compassion as a focusing lens. You encase it all in a housing of integrity. When you ignite it, your path cuts through darkness. But if you rush the assembly or ignore your heart, the blade will sputter or explode. He explained that the Force is both glue and fuel, binding everything together and giving it purpose. Luke nodded, absorbing these metaphors. When his blade finally shimmered into existence, brilliant green, he gasped. He swung it experimentally, feeling the weight and the light combine. Obi-Wan watched with a bittersweet smile, remembering his own first swings. He saw the cycle of teaching and learning continue. Obi-Wan also reflected on the artistry of lightsabers beyond their function. Some hilts were plain, others ornate. The hilt he built after becoming a knight was sturdy and utilitarian, reflecting his practical mind. Ventress's sabers curved like claws, showing her agile fighting style. Yoda's was short and elegant. Dooku's was curved and aristocratic. The design revealed personality. In exile, when he disassembled his saber to hide it, he marveled at the simplicity and complexity coexisting. He polished the emitter and thought about how even powerful tools require maintenance. He saw parallels with relationships. They must be cleaned of resentment, aligned with truth, and recharged with time together. There were darker associations too. He remembered red blades igniting in smoke-filled rooms, accompanied by the smell of fear. He recalled the weight of a saber in his hand when he swung at Anakin's limbs. He felt how the hilt shook when meeting Grievous's spinning cascade of blades. He acknowledged the weapon's capacity to harm and to protect. He understood that the saber is a tool defined by the heart that wields it. He taught Luke to respect it, not to fetishize it. He explained that living by the blade means living by a promise, to defend those who cannot defend themselves, and to use violence only as a last resort. He confessed that he had not always lived up to that promise, but that he continued to strive. Beyond Luke, he thought about the next generation. He imagined Rey, decades later, sliding open a secret compartment in a collapsed Star Destroyer and finding a kyber crystal glowing faintly. He saw her building a staff saber that mirrored her staff, blending old and new. He imagined her hearing his voice and the voices of others, guiding her hands. He recognized that while lightsabers can cut through doors and deflect blaster bolts, their true power lies in the stories they carry. Each scratch and burn mark tells of choices made and lessons learned. Each activation is a vow. In this way, the weapon becomes a companion, a mirror and a symbol. When he spoke to Luke about these things, he hoped to instill reverence rather than awe. He hoped Luke would feel the weight not just of the metal, but of the legacy. As you breathe deeply now, think of the hum of a lightsaber as a lullaby. Its steady thrum matches your heartbeat. It is both a warning and a comfort, a call to vigilance and a promise of protection. Let its rhythm soothe you as the night deepens. Let the image of two figures, one elder, one young, working together to craft a weapon and a philosophy, remind you that mentorship is an art. As with forging a saber, forging a life takes time and intention. The Force flows through both, connecting teacher and student. Sleep knowing that within you is a crystal waiting to be discovered, and when it is, your own unique light will shine. Traveling alongside Qui-Gon Jinn was like riding a river, whose course was known only to itself. The older Jedi trusted his intuition above all. On missions he would pause, close his eyes, and change direction based on a feeling. Obi-Wan learned to let go of rigid plans and follow the current. They negotiated trade agreements on core worlds with marble floors and golden statues, and then ventured into swampy jungles where vines clung to their boots. Qui-Gon would stop to help a farmer fix a broken droid even when ambassadors waited. He taught Obi-Wan that small acts of kindness ripple outward. In return, Obi-Wan kept track of schedules and carried extra supplies. He learned that structure and spontaneity can coexist. They were like two hands grasping a hilt, different in posture yet united in purpose. Their assignment to protect Duchess Satine of Mandalore lasted far longer than planned. Assassins lurked in shadows, hired by those who wanted to destabilize the neutral world. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan escorted Satine through crowded markets wearing plain robes and disguised laughter. They shared cramped hideouts where whispers carried more weight than shouts. Satine's wit matched Obi-Wan's, and their banter often lightened tense moments. One night, while hiding in an abandoned farmhouse, she told him about her childhood playing in Mandalore's grasslands, and he responded with stories of temple fountains. During a chase across rooftops, they reached for each other's hands to steady themselves. Feeling his palm against hers sent a jolt through him, unlike any Force training. He felt an unfamiliar pull to stay by her side, to laugh and argue and build a life together. Duty whispered louder than desire. Jedi were expected to forgo attachments. Satine's role as a leader demanded sacrifice as well. They spoke candidly about their feelings. One evening beneath a blood-red sunset, Satine's braid glowed in the fading light. She confessed her affection, and he admitted his. There was a moment when they considered turning away from their obligations. Qui-Gon, watching from a distance, remained silent. In the end, they decided to walk their separate paths, trusting the Force to guide them. They promised to carry each other in their hearts. That decision weighed on Obi-Wan later whenever he counseled Anakin about attachments. He knew personally the cost and wisdom of letting go. Missions continued. On the world of Ord Mantell, they confronted pirates who wielded vibroblades with savage precision. On Mon Cala, they swam through coral reefs to rescue Diplomat. In each adventure, Qui-Gon would encourage Obi-Wan to trust his instincts and to listen to people's stories before drawing his saber. They returned to the temple between assignments, presenting their reports with dirt still under their nails. The council often chastised Qui-Gon for his methods, and Obi-Wan learned how to defend his master with carefully chosen words. Their partnership taught him to balance respect for authority with the courage to follow what felt right. These lessons prepared him to stand before the council later and advocate for Anakin's training despite their fears. When Qui-Gon fell to Maul's blade, the grief hit Obi-Wan like a physical blow. In the quiet aftermath, he realized that his mentor had been more than a teacher. He had been family. Holding his hand, Obi-Wan promised to continue his work, even if it meant taking on a responsibility he did not feel ready for. Satine's face flashed through his mind as he made the vow. He understood that love can empower but cannot replace duty. This understanding shaped the calm manner with which he would later guide Luke, choosing honesty and patience over imposition. Qui-Gon's last request resonated through every choice he would make. Trust in the living force and in the goodness of others. That trust would be tested again and again. The mission to Naboo unfolded like a holodrama, full of twists and revelations. From the moment Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon stepped aboard the Trade Federation's ship, they sensed deception. The negotiation table became a trap, forcing them to slice through sealed blast doors and sprint down corridors while battle droids clanked in pursuit. On the planet's surface, they hid in swamps and encountered Jar Jar Binks, a clumsy but loyal Gungan whose life Obi-Wan saved, setting off a chain of gratitude that would later bring thousands of Gungan warriors to the Queen's aid. They navigated underwater through glowing tunnels to reach a hidden city and then rode strange sea creatures through a planet core teeming with predators. Danger kept them alert, but Qui-Gon's calm was contagious. Obi-Wan learned that fear could be acknowledged without being obeyed. When they landed on Tatooine to repair their hyperdrive, fate introduced them to a small boy in a junkyard. Anakin Skywalker offered them parts and hospitality, despite his circumstances. He spoke of building a protocol droid to help his mother and of dreaming of stars. Qui-Gon sensed his potential. Obi-Wan, wary of attachment, initially doubted bringing a child into their fight. Watching Anakin race across the desert track in a pod he built with his own hands changed his perspective. The roar of engines, the smell of heated sand, the cheers of the crowd, and the sight of the small figure leaning into turns with focus and courage impressed him. When Anakin crossed the finish line first, securing both his freedom and the parts they needed, Obi-Wan felt pride and trepidation. He recognized the Force's hand in the boy's life. He also recognized the gravity of Qui-Gon's decision to train him. Returning to Coruscant, Obi-Wan watched the Council's faces as Qui-Gon presented Anakin. Their hesitation mirrored his own earlier doubts. He knew the Jedi code forbade attachment and feared what exceptions might bring. Yet he also remembered Satine and the lessons of compassion. When Qui-Gon insisted on training Anakin even without Council approval and declared Obi-Wan ready for his trials, the young knight felt a complicated mix of honor and fear. He wanted to prove himself, to honor his master's faith, but he also sensed the immense responsibility of raising a child so powerful. He agreed to train Anakin not only out of loyalty, but out of belief that he could guide him. That belief would shape his choices and his heartbreak. Naboo's final battle split heroes across 3 fronts: a palace invasion, a ground assault, and a duel below the city's streets. While young pilots took to space and Gungans clashed with droids, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon pursued Darth Maul through generator rooms, alive with sparking arcs. Maul's double-bladed saber twirled like a deadly windmill. The Sith's face was a mask of hatred, while Qui-Gon's was calm determination. When Red Blade pierced green and Qui-Gon fell, time slowed for Obi-Wan. Rage and grief surged, threatening to overwhelm his training. He let the emotions pass through him like a wave, and focused. His strikes became precise, his footwork fluid. In one motion he bisected Maul. He rushed to his master's side and listened to his final wish. The weight of that wish settled on his shoulders and would not lift for many years. Becoming a master changed Obi-Wan in subtle ways. He went from following orders to giving them, from being guided to guiding. Training Anakin was like wrestling with a wild current. The boy's abilities were staggering. He disassembled and reassembled his lightsaber blindfolded. He sensed droid traps before they triggered. He also challenged authority at every turn. Obi-Wan drew upon his memories of Qui-Gon's patience and Yoda's humor to temper frustration. He set Anakin tasks that required cooperation and reflection. He took him to visit families on Coruscant so he could see what they protected. He spent long nights explaining the code and the reasons behind it. Anakin listened and nodded, and then often did what he felt anyway. Their mission to protect Senator Padme Amidala from assassins thrust them into intrigue. Chasing a shapeshifter through neon-lit city canyons, they leapt from speeders, rolled across rooftop billboards, and argued mid-air about the safety of their maneuvers. Obi-Wan's admonishments hid a smile. He recognized himself in Anakin's improvisations. The trail led him alone to Kamino, where he discovered an army of clones, bred for the Republic. Rain hammered against his robes as he met template Jango Fett and watched rows of identical troopers march in unison. He reported to the council, confused and concerned. The future, clouded by the dark side, offered no clarity. Meanwhile, Anakin, sent with Padme to Naboo, grew closer to her. The secrets he carried created distance between master and apprentice. On Geonosis, events spiraled. Obi-Wan's investigation exposed a conspiracy of separatists, led by Count Dooku, a former Jedi. Captured and suspended above an arena floor, Obi-Wan exchanged banter with Anakin about why he always ended up in predicaments. They fought side by side against charging beasts and waves of droids until Yoda arrived with clone reinforcements. It was the start of a war. Later, facing Dooku, Obi-Wan and Anakin rushed together without coordination. The elder separatist easily countered them, slicing through Anakin's arm and sending Obi-Wan sprawling. As he lay wounded, he realized his own arrogance had contributed to their defeat. He resolved to teach his student not just skill, but humility. The lesson would take years and would not fully land until it was nearly too late. During the war's early campaigns, Obi-Wan developed a reputation for cleverness. On Christophsis, he used light refraction to cloak forces and surprise droid columns. On Ryloth, he negotiated with a stubborn resistance leader over tea, while bombs fell outside. Persuading him to trust the Republic, he earned the respect of clones who fought alongside him, particularly Commander Cody, whose loyalty became a comfort. He also maintained correspondence with Satine, offering advice and listening to her concerns about Mandalore's neutrality. Their messages were formal, but edged with affection. Amid the chaos, he sought to nurture connections and act as a moral compass. These efforts gave him hope, even as shadows lengthened. He believed that by guiding Anakin and serving selflessly, he could help steer the galaxy away from darkness. Mandalore was a planet of contrasts, white domes rising above red deserts, ancient warrior traditions coexisting uneasily with pacifist ideals. When Obi-Wan returned there during the Clone Wars, he found Satine leading a fragile coalition. Political intrigue simmered as Death Watch, a faction yearning for the old warrior ways, plotted with shadows. Obi-Wan arrived to protect Satine and the planet's neutrality. Their reunion was bittersweet. They spoke politely in council chambers, and more openly in quiet corridors. Memories of shared laughter surfaced between discussions of trade routes and assassins. Satine teased him about his beard. He complimented her cunning. Danger drew them together, and duty kept them apart. They both knew the tightrope they walked could snap under the weight of war. The crisis came when Maul, resurrected and fueled by vengeance, aligned with Death Watch to seize Mandalore. He challenged Satine's position and lured Obi-Wan into a trap. In a throne room filled with steel and glass, Maul held Satine hostage. Obi-Wan stood weaponless, his hands raised, his voice steady. He pleaded for compassion, reminding Maul of choices. With cruel satisfaction, Maul plunged his blade through Satine's chest. She fell into Obi-Wan's arms, her eyes never leaving his. With her last breath, she told him she always loved him. Her confession struck him like a saber. He whispered that he would have left the Order for her. The moment was a collision of what could have been and what was. It carved a hollow in his heart that would ache forever. Maul expected revenge. He wanted Obi-Wan to abandon his principles and give in to rage. Instead, Obi-Wan embraced grief without letting it consume him. He refused to fight with hate. He used cunning and allies to liberate Mandalore without succumbing to darkness. His restraint frustrated Maul, whose own choices were born of bitterness. This confrontation crystallized Obi-Wan's commitment to the Jedi path. He realized that vengeance cannot heal loss, and that love, even when unfulfilled, strengthens rather than weakens. Satine's death deepened his empathy for Anakin's fear of loss. He attempted to share that understanding, though words often fell short of reaching his former apprentice. In the aftermath, Mandalore's politics became more complex. Satine's sister Bo-Katan sought to restore balance, and Obi-Wan supported her. He collaborated with Ahsoka, who returned to lead a siege against Maul. He relinquished control of his pride and allowed others to lead where he could not. Watching Mandalore's citizens rebuild in the midst of war, he reflected on the nature of attachment once again. He saw that love can inspire resilience in a population, and that letting go can mean trusting others to continue the fight. These reflections informed his later decision to entrust Luke's training to Yoda, and eventually to Luke himself. The Mandalore arc taught Obi-Wan that sometimes the greatest act of love is to step aside. As a general, Obi-Wan commanded with grace and humor. He walked through clone encampments, greeting troopers by nickname, and asking about their health. He sat with commanders like Cody and Bly, discussing strategy over steaming cups of kaf. He listened to suggestions from sergeants who had been grown for war, but had developed minds of their own. He believed that good leadership involved listening more than speaking. On many nights he wrote letters to the families of fallen troopers. Even though clones were not supposed to have families, he honored their individuality and mourned each loss as a person, not a unit number. This empathy earned him loyalty that could not be programmed. His battle strategies were both daring and prudent. On Umbara, when another general's arrogance led to clones firing on one another, Obi-Wan intervened, calming tensions and exposing the corruption. On Ryloth, he orchestrated a diversion that saved Twi'lek hostages without demolishing their homes. He used Force-enhanced leaps to surprise droid commanders and negotiated surrenders to minimize bloodshed. He maintained a rapport with fellow Jedi generals, sharing intel and humor with Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Ploke. Despite exhaustion, he kept his spirits up, joking with Anakin during brief lulls and telling stories to clones around campfires. Laughter became a shield against despair. The war's long grind wore him down. He witnessed entire cities reduced to rubble, fields scorched, and oceans boiled away. He heard the cries of refugees, separated from families. He felt the weight of each casualty report. He prayed to the Force for guidance, and sometimes felt only silence. He questioned decisions made in marble halls on Coruscant that sent men to die on rocks. He wondered if there could have been another way, yet he never let the questions paralyze him. He stayed focused on the moment at hand, the life he could save, the child he could shield. Those choices added up to hope, even when victory seemed distant. In the war's later years, the bonds between Obi-Wan, his clones, and his fellow Jedi deepened. They celebrated small successes: a marketplace reopened, a disease cured, a supply route secured. They learned together when comrades were lost. Obi-Wan organized memorials where names were recited, voices trembling. He meditated with troopers who struggled with trauma. He taught them breathing exercises that he had learned as a youngling. These acts of care were small rebellions against the dehumanization of war. They reinforced his belief that the Jedi's role was to serve the living, not abstract ideals. This belief would later guide him when he chose to watch over a farm boy, rather than remain on a council that had lost its way. Despite their differences, Obi-Wan and Anakin grew into brothers. They shared jokes on gunships, argued about tactics in tented command posts, and whispered reassurances in medbays. Obi-Wan taught Anakin to tie a proper Padawan braid, and teased him about his haircuts. Anakin teased Obi-Wan about his graying beard. They rescued each other countless times. When Anakin leapt from a crashing cruiser, Obi-Wan was there with an extended hand. When Obi-Wan was pinned under rubble, Anakin lifted it with the Force. In quiet moments, they reminisced about simpler days, before war and politics. They joked about who would get stuck in what predicament next. Their bond was forged through shared danger and deep trust. Yet, Obi-Wan saw darkness creeping around his friend. He noticed how Anakin's jaw clenched when the council questioned him. He heard frustration when Anakin spoke of rules. He saw fear when he talked about losing Padme. Obi-Wan tried to address these emotions gently, sharing his own experience of letting go of Satin. He suggested that strength comes from acceptance, not control. Anakin smiled and nodded, but rarely let the council sink into his bones. Palpatine's influence twisted his perspective. Obi-Wan trusted the Chancellor for too long, believing their friendship to be genuine. When he realized Palpatine's true identity, it was nearly too late. During the rescue of Palpatine above Coruscant, Obi-Wan and Anakin fought side by side against battle droids and Count Dooku, tethered to a chair by lightning. Obi-Wan feigned unconsciousness, while Anakin dispatched Dooku at the Chancellor's urging. Later, in the temple, Obi-Wan watched the hologram of Anakin igniting his saber in a room full of frightened younglings. He felt his stomach drop, denial warred with reality. The boy he had raised was now a destroyer. His voice shook when he told Padme what he had seen, and asked where Anakin had gone. He sensed she knew more than she said, and felt empathy, even as he feared the consequences. When he confronted Anakin on Mustafar, he did so not with anger, but with sorrow. He declared that he had failed him. Their blades clashed, and their words cut deeper. Obi-Wan tried to remind Anakin of who he had been: a protector, a friend, a light. Anakin responded with accusations about treachery and jealousy. The heat of the lava mirrored the heat of their emotions. When the duel ended and Anakin burned on the bank, Obi-Wan cried. He left with his friend's saber, promising to watch over the new hope. Born from this tragedy, he would carry the weight of that moment forever, replaying it in dreams and in the desert wind. It was the price of love and duty colliding. Revenge of the Sith unfolded like a fever dream. Obi-Wan began by crash-landing a burning ship onto Coruscant. Chuckling with Anakin about another happy landing, he watched his former Padawan be hailed as a hero for dispatching Dooku. He heard whispers in council chambers about the Chancellor's growing power and about the need to spy on him. He delivered that request to Anakin, sensing the strain it caused. He spoke with Yoda about the dark side clouding everything. He accepted an assignment to track down General Grievous on Utapau, unaware of how events were converging. On Utapau's sinkhole levels, he rode a loyal Varactyl named Boga down vertical walls and into mechanical lairs. He exchanged quips with Grievous before the cyborg unleashed a whirlwind of sabers. Obi-Wan focused on timing and precision, knowing brute strength would not prevail. In a flurry of strikes, he severed hands, forcing Grievous to retreat. After a chase on a wheel bike and a blaster duel, he fired a shot that ignited the general's fuel-soaked organs. Grievous collapsed in flames, and Obi-Wan sighed with relief. He thought the war might finally be nearing an end. A transmission from Cody changed everything. The clone's tone was respectful as he returned Obi-Wan's saber. Moments later, with a coded phrase, he ordered troopers to open fire. Blaster bolts rained down. Obi-Wan fell with Boga into the waters below. A soldier he trusted had just tried to kill him, scrambling onto a ledge. He processed what happened. The clones had turned across the galaxy. Jedi were dying under a betrayal, disguised as obedience. He hid and plotted his escape. He felt a tremor in the Force as masters and knights perished. Once safe, he contacted Yoda and agreed to meet on the Tantive ship. Sneaking back into the temple disguised as a clone, he saw bodies of young trainees and scorch marks along marble walls. He watched security footage of Anakin kneeling before Palpatine. Now revealed as Darth Sidious, he clutched his chest. The temple, which had once felt like home, now felt like a tomb. Order 66 was a severing of trust on a scale he had never imagined. It taught him that institutions can be corrupted and that loyalty must rest on values rather than commands. That realization guided his later decision to train Luke outside the structures that had failed. Exile demanded a different kind of courage. On Tatooine, Obi-Wan swapped robes for rough tunics and city towers for sandstone caves. He mended fences, literally and figuratively. He hit moisture farmers, repaired vaporators, and mediated disputes between traders and Jawas. He learned to ride a massif to deter Tusken raiders without violence. He befriended a herd of banthas and hummed old temple hymns as he brushed their shaggy coats. He adopted the name Ben and allowed rumors about him being a crazy old wizard to circulate. It kept curious strangers at bay. The Force became his companion. He meditated at sunrise and sunset, feeling the energy flow through dunes and dust. He trained himself to listen for Luke's laughter on the wind and to sense danger before it approached the Lars homestead. Daily life was humble. He cooked simple meals over a fire pit, savoring the taste of fresh fruit on rare occasions when Jawa traders offered it. He bartered mechanical repairs for cloth and water. He wrote in a journal, noting the color of the sky on certain mornings and the patterns of womp rat tracks. He reread old Jedi texts and practiced katas with a training saber in the quiet of his cave. He occasionally visited a cantina incognito to hear rumors of Imperial movements. He smiled to himself when patrons boasted about fights he had supposedly lost and water thieves he had chased off. Solitude forced him to face his regrets. Under the stars, he whispered apologies to Saturn and Qui-Gon. Sometimes he heard Qui-Gon's voice reply with reassurance. Protecting Luke without interfering required restraint. When Tusken raiders threatened the Lars farm, Obi-Wan used a call imitating a crate dragon to scare them off. When Luke wandered too far into the dunes, he gently nudged a bantha to block his path. He watched the boy grow from a toddler chasing womp rats with a stick to a teenager tinkering with old speeder parts. He longed to teach him about the Force, but respected Owen's wish to keep him uninvolved. Patience became a practice and a gift. In waiting, he learned to trust the Force's timing. He observed sandstorms carving new shapes in dunes and saw parallels in Luke's development. The winds of destiny would reshape them both when the moment came. In dreams, he visited places he would never see again. The temple's fountains, Coruscant's sky lanes, Mandalore's domes. He woke with tears and gratitude. He practiced the technique of retaining consciousness after death, as taught by Qui-Gon. It involved releasing fear completely and embracing unity with the Force. He practiced by helping small creatures cross streams and by forgiving himself for failures. Over time, he sensed his edges blur, like water blending with sand. He accepted that his purpose was no longer to swing a blade, but to watch and to guide when necessary. This acceptance freed him. When Luke finally knocked on his door with R2-D2 and C-3PO trailing behind, Obi-Wan was ready to step back into the larger world without resentment or urgency. He welcomed the boy with a smile and a story. Years into his exile, a shadow returned. Maul, sustained by hatred and dark magic, tracked Obi-Wan across the stars to Tatooine. He sought revenge for their first duel and for the life he believed Obi-Wan had stolen from him. One night in the dunes, the former Sith ignited his blade, its red light casting sharp shadows on sand. Obi-Wan sensed his approach and stepped into the moonlight. Their eyes met, two men bound by history. Maul taunted him, accusing him of hiding, of failing those he loved. Obi-Wan remained silent, his grip steady but relaxed. He knew this would be their last meeting. They circled each other, sabers humming. For a moment, Obi-Wan adopted the defensive stance he had once used as a younger man. Then, seeing Maul's aggressive posture, he shifted into the pose Qui-Gon favored. The change was deliberate and compassionate. Maul lunged, replicating the move that had killed Qui-Gon decades earlier. Obi-Wan anticipated the strike, parried, and in a single motion, cut through Maul's hilt and body. The fight lasted mere seconds. As Maul fell, Obi-Wan caught him. Cradled in his arms, the dying man asked if the person he sought to protect was the chosen one. Obi-Wan answered yes. Maul relaxed and for the first time let go of his hatred. Obi-Wan gently closed his eyes. He built a small pyre and watched flames consume the body, smoke rising into the night. He whispered a prayer for his old foe, releasing both of them from the cycle of revenge. Closure wrapped around him like a blanket. He felt the Force hum with approval. The duel with Maul reinforced lessons about transience and compassion. Obi-Wan saw how clinging to anger had devastated Maul's life. He affirmed his commitment to letting go. He also saw his own growth mirrored. As a young man, he had fought with passion and desperation. As an older man, he fought with clarity and mercy. The encounter was a chapter closing. There would be no more threats from the past seeking to pull him back. His attention could fully turn toward the future and the boy he watched over. As he walked back to his hut under a sky streaked with shooting stars, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He whispered Satine's name and thanked her for teaching him about love that endures beyond death. He thanked Qui-Gon for the training that had saved him yet again. Gratitude warmed him even as the night grew cold. The arrival of R2-D2 and C-3PO, with a recorded plea from Princess Leia, disrupted the quiet rhythm of Obi-Wan's exile. Hearing the holographic message, he felt the Force stir like a breeze before a storm. He invited Luke into his hut, handed him a lightsaber, wrapped in cloth, and spoke gently of Luke's father, a man he had loved and lost. Luke's wide eyes mirrored Anakin's from decades earlier. Obi-Wan explained the basics of the Force, of how it connects all things, of how trust in it allows one to do the improbable. He invited Luke to join him. Initially reluctant, the boy soon had no choice when tragedy struck his home. Together they traveled to Mos Eisley, a cantina's mixture of species and smells, a stark contrast to the desert. Obi-Wan's calm presence diffused threats and eased negotiations with smugglers. He hired Han and Chewbacca and set course for Alderaan, only to be pulled into the orbit of a massive space station. Inside the metallic labyrinth of the Death Star, Obi-Wan moved like a shadow. He disabled tractor beams, avoided patrols and whispered instructions through a comlink. He felt the presence of Vader approaching, a cold void in the Force. He knew confrontation was inevitable. In a long corridor lined with troopers, the two old rivals ignited their blades. Their sabers crackled, blue and red clashing in arcs of light. Vader taunted him, but Obi-Wan smiled. He understood that defeating Vader with a blade was not the way to win. Instead, he chose to surrender his corporeal form. He raised his weapon in salute and became one with the Force as the red blade passed through empty robes. His choice startled Vader and inspired Luke. In death, he triumphed by enabling the younger generation to escape and fight another day. On board the Millennium Falcon, Luke heard Obi-Wan's voice guiding him. "Run, Luke," he whispered, urging him to flee the corridor. Later, over Yavin's moon, Obi-Wan's voice returned, telling Luke to trust the Force, to turn off his targeting computer and feel the torpedo's path. Luke listened, fired, and destroyed the Death Star. Obi-Wan's faith in him bore fruit. The old hermit's actions illustrated that sometimes the most powerful act is to step aside and allow others to rise. His sacrifice was not an end, but a transformation into a more potent form of influence. He became a whisper in the wind, a voice in the mind, a warmth in the heart that urged courage when fear threatened to paralyze. Through his death and guidance, Obi-Wan embodied the Jedi principle that letting go can empower others. He did not cling to life or to the need to be the hero. He accepted that his role was complete and that Luke's journey needed rule. This acceptance carried echoes of his choice to let Satine go and his decision to train Anakin. It was the culmination of years of lessons: love without attachment, duty without ego, faith without certainty. As Luke grieved for the old man he barely knew, Obi-Wan stood unseen beside him, feeling pride and peace. In the quiet of hyperspace, his voice whispered of future challenges and promised guidance. Luke smiled through tears and felt ready to face whatever came next. Becoming a Force ghost required surrender and focus. Obi-Wan practiced on Tatooine, but found the reality astonishing. No longer bound by flesh, he could travel at the speed of thought and see the patterns of the Force like threads of light. He visited Yoda on Dagobah, marveling at the vibrant life emanating from the swamp. He observed Luke training with heavy spheres and climbing vines. He offered encouragement and sometimes stern reminders. He whispered ancient teachings, passed down from Qui-Gon, and new insights he discovered in death. He watched as Luke confronted visions in a cave and grappled with his own darkness. He found himself growing as well, learning humility from the younger generation's resilience. After Luke lost his hand and hope on Bespin, Obi-Wan appeared beside Yoda's fire. The two old masters debated whether Luke should be told the truth about his parentage. Yoda favored withholding to protect him. Obi-Wan felt the weight of deception. He regretted not telling Luke sooner yet, feared crushing him with the knowledge that Vader was his father. In the end, they agreed to let the Force guide the moment. Luke learned from Vader himself. When he returned, shattered, Obi-Wan appeared on Dagobah and explained the truth with gentle honesty. He admitted his failure to tell Luke sooner and accepted Luke's anger. He counseled patience and urged him to forgive. The moment was a culmination of decades of watching others fall and rise. It showed that truth, even painful, is better than a comforting lie. As Luke prepared to face the Emperor, Obi-Wan offered caution. He warned Luke not to underestimate the power of the dark side. He reminded him of the stakes and of the possibility of repeating past mistakes. Yet he also respected Luke's conviction that there was still good in Vader. Obi-Wan watched with Yoda from beyond, as Luke defied their expectations. When Anakin hurled the Emperor into the reactor shaft and redeemed himself, Obi-Wan felt a wave of relief wash over the Force. He saw that despite missteps and misjudgments, hope had prevailed. He smiled at Anakin, now young and luminous, standing beside Yoda and himself. Old wounds closed as they watched Luke celebrate with friends. The Force hummed with balance restored. In the years that followed, Obi-Wan continued to whisper to Luke and to other sensitives. He nudged a young pilot on a remote world to join a resistance. He soothed a mother who feared her child's gifts. He visited Leia in dreams, offering comfort when grief overwhelmed her. He guided Rey decades later, showing her the path to a hidden saber buried in sand. His influence spanned generations, connecting the Skywalker line to the broader tapestry of the Force. Each time he spoke, his voice carried the wisdom of successes and failures, of love and loss, of patience and action. He had become the mentor he once saw. Teaching as a ghost also taught him. He saw how the universe evolved and how new problems required fresh solutions. He learned from those who came after him, like Ahsoka, who forged her own path outside the Order, and Rey, who balanced multiple legacies. He realized that the essence of the Jedi is not in rigid adherence to tradition, but in adaptability, guided by compassion. This realization completed his journey from a headstrong apprentice to a humble guide. It allowed him to rest within the Force with peace and purpose. Throughout his life, Obi-Wan grappled with the concept of duty. As a youngling, duty meant obeying instructors. As an apprentice, it meant following Qui-Gon even when the Council disagreed. As a master, it meant guiding Anakin, despite personal doubts. As a general, it meant sending soldiers into harm's way. As an exile, it meant waiting patiently in obscurity. At each stage, duty demanded something different. He learned that duty is not a set of rules, but a commitment to act for the greater good. He learned that sometimes duty requires bending the rules, and sometimes it requires walking away from everything familiar. He learned that failing to uphold duty can feel like a wound that never heals, but that continuing to try is itself a form of duty. Failure was a constant companion. He failed to save Qui-Gon. He failed to recognize the depth of Anakin's suffering. He failed to protect Satine. He failed to stop the rise of the Empire. These failures could have shattered him. Instead, he chose to learn from them. He realized that failure is not an end, but a teacher. Every mistake revealed a blind spot, a flaw in approach, a need for humility. When he told Luke about Vader's fall, he acknowledged his part in it. When he advised Rey, he did not dictate, but offered perspective, understanding that she must forge her own way. He turned his failures into stepping stones for others. This transformation of pain into wisdom is one of his greatest legacies. Hope sustained him through exile and war. Hope glowed in Satine's eyes when she spoke of a pacifist Mandalore. Hope shone in clone troopers' jokes as they huddled in trenches. Hope flickered in Anakin's smile before it vanished. Hope burned in Luke's determination to do what was right, even when elders told him it was impossible. Obi-Wan nurtured hope like a gardener tends a tender plant. He protected it from harsh winds and watered it with encouragement. At times, hope seemed naive against the dark machinery of the Empire. Yet he knew that hope is what allows light to return. He saw it catch like flame on Endor and spread through the galaxy. He trusted hope even when evidence suggested despair. That trust is woven into every story told about him. In reflecting on duty, failure, and hope, Obi-Wan saw how they interconnect. Duty without hope becomes hollow. Failure without hope becomes despair. Hope without duty becomes fantasy. Balancing them requires self-awareness and humility. He realized that living in harmony with the Force means accepting that joy and sorrow, action and rest, gain and loss are all part of a larger pattern. This realization allowed him to act with clarity and to rest with peace. When he explained the Force to Luke and Rey, he spoke from this integrated understanding. He encouraged them to feel the currents, but to choose their own strokes. His life thus became an invitation to serve others, to learn from missteps, and to dare to hope. In moments of deep meditation, Obi-Wan would let his consciousness drift beyond the surface of the Force into a realm where time was fluid. He saw events like waves on a vast ocean, each crest influenced by those before it. He watched the births and deaths of stars as breaths in a universal body. He felt how his choices resonated beyond his lifespan, touching people he would never meet. He glimpsed a young scavenger climbing dunes, a boy sweeping a stable on Cantonica, a child in a distant village hearing tales of Jedi. He realized that the Force connects these individuals through unseen threads. His life was one thread among many, strong in places, frayed in others. He thought about Qui-Gon, Satine, Ahsoka, Anakin, Luke and Rey as beads on this thread, each shining with its own color. Some moments between them were bright, others shadowed. He saw that mistakes and miracles bind people together. He saw that the dark side is not a separate ocean, but a current that flows through the same waters, churning when ignored. He understood that fighting the current makes one weary, while working with it can guide one around obstacles. These insights expanded his empathy. He became gentler in his counsel, less inclined to judge quickly. He encouraged others to explore their own relationship with the Force, rather than imposing it. Generational guidance became his calling. He whispered lessons into Luke's ear as he prepared to raise a new generation of Jedi. He visited Leia in dreams and helped her balance politics and spirituality. He watched over Ben Solo as he was born, feeling the weight of family history settle onto the infant. He nudged Ahsoka when she hesitated on a threshold, reminding her that leaving the Order did not sever her from the Force. He guided Rey to the Skywalker lightsaber, buried beneath snow. He felt immense pride as she and others took what he offered and shaped it into their own wisdom. He learned that true teaching is a dialogue. The learner teaches the teacher through questions and challenges. In these cosmic reflections, he also confronted his own fears. He worried about being forgotten, about his failures, defining him. The Force gently revealed to him that identity is not fixed by labels. He is not solely master, hermit, general, or ghost. He is a being of experience and intention, shaped by choice and circumstance. The Force does not tally mistakes or victories, but honors growth. This realization relieved him of lingering shame. He allowed himself to feel pride in the boy who left the temple, sorrow for the man who watched a friend burn, and joy for the ghost who guided a lineage. He saw that all these selves coexisted within him. The gift of cosmic perspective is the gift of self-forgiveness. When he shared this perspective with others, he did not lecture. He told stories, asked questions, and listened. He described the smell of rain on Coruscant and the sound of leaves on Dagobah. He reminded listeners that the galaxy is wide and that each person's path matters. He urged patience with oneself. He celebrated resilience. In doing so, he extended the circle of the Force, inviting more hearts into harmony. His story became a meditation on connection that continued to resonate long after his voice ceased to speak. Those who heard it often found their own burdens lighter and their futures brighter. As you listen to this narrative and feel sleep tugging at your thoughts, consider the arc of Obi-Wan Kenobi's life. It is not simply a tale of battles and duels. It is a meditation on growth and grit. A youngling becomes a knight becomes a master becomes a hermit becomes a guide. The transitions are marked by loss and discovery, by tears and laughter. He stumbles and rises, fails and learns, loves and lets go. Each phase is a verse in a song whose melody is woven throughout the galaxy. The song speaks of service, of choosing the hard right over the easy wrong, of trusting others to carry what you cannot. It reminds us that we are part of something larger than ourselves. When he left his family as a baby, he trusted strangers to guide him. When he lost his master, he stepped into a role he did not feel ready for. When his apprentice betrayed everything they had fought for, he held on to empathy. When he lost the woman he loved, he chose mercy over vengeance. When his order collapsed, he watched and waited. When his time came, he surrendered, knowing others would finish the work. His story is therefore about faith, not in a creed, but in the goodness that perseveres through darkness. Faith is what allowed him to keep hoping, to keep teaching, to keep loving. Faith is what he passes on as his final gift. Imagine him now, not as a soldier or a ghost, but as a presence sitting beside you as you drift to sleep. He reaches out an invisible hand and rests it lightly on your shoulder. He whispers that you are enough, that your mistakes do not define you, and that your choices matter. He tells you that even when you feel alone, you are part of a vast network of lives and stories. His voice is gentle, soothing, and unhurried, He invites you to breathe in and let go of tension. He invites you to trust that tomorrow you can begin again. As his voice fades into the soft hum of your own breath, you carry with you a sense of belonging and calm. The night wraps around you like a cloak, and the Force surrounds you, connects you, and lulls you into dreams.